The morning Victoria Hale arrived at Silverstone Ridge Raceway. The sky had not yet committed to blue. Low clouds pressed against the Northamptonshire hills, and the air carried that particular English dampness that finds its way through every layer of clothing regardless of how much money you spent on the jacket. Victoria's jacket cost £400. She felt the cold anyway. Her convoy, two black Audi Q8s and a silver fleet vehicle carrying her personal assistant and two junior strategists, rolled through the paddock gates at 7:43, 17 minutes ahead of schedule. She had requested 8 o'clock arrivals from her staff, which meant she always appeared first. It was not a coincidence. It was architecture. The raceway had been operational under the Whitmore Group for 11 years before the sale. 11 years of incremental decline, missed sponsorship targets, and a championship podium that had not seen Silverstone Ridge medal since the season prior to last. Victoria had reviewed the financials with the same expression she used for autopsies. Calm, thorough, unmoved by the emotional residue of what the numbers represented. A motorsport venue was, at its core, an asset. Assets either appreciated or they did not. She stepped from the vehicle and took in the facility with the practiced efficiency of someone who had acquired and restructured 4 other operations in the past 7 years. The grandstand needed repainting. The sponsor signage along the pit wall was dated. The hospitality suite on the east side had a tarpaulin over a section of roof that suggested water ingress and decision paralysis in equal measure. All fixable, she was halfway to the technical entrance when she saw the truck, a Ford F-150. Vintage mid-90s. By the look of it, the color of old iron. Not quite red and not quite brown, the kind of hue that develops when primer and rust negotiate a truce over many years. It was parked at an angle across the access lane that led to the engineering bays, not quite blocking the route but making it necessary for anything wider than a bicycle to pause and reconsider. Victoria paused. Around her, 3 members of the groundskeeping crew had stopped pretending to work. Adrian Cross, her COO, materialized 2 steps behind her left shoulder, a position he had perfected over 18 months of employment. Her assistant, a young woman named Claire Sutton, stood at a careful distance with a tablet. "Whose vehicle is that?" Victoria asked. No one answered immediately. The silence had the quality of people hoping someone else would volunteer. "It belongs to one of the garage contractors," Adrian said at last. He had the voice of a man who had spent considerable time learning how to sound certain about things he had only partly confirmed. "Mechanic. Comes in early." Victoria looked at the truck for another moment. The windshield was clean. Someone had made the effort to clear the glass, even if they hadn't bothered with the body panels. A single crack ran from the lower left corner up toward the rearview mirror like a river finding its course. "Move it," she said. And her voice carried well, in the cold air not raised, simply projected. This was a distinction she had worked on. Shouting was imprecision. Volume controlled was something else. A few of the groundskeeping staff shifted. Someone produced a radio. The man who appeared from the side of the nearest engineering bay walked without urgency. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in dark work trousers and a gray long-sleeve thermal, with a collar that had been worn to softness over several seasons. He was not tall in the way that demanded attention, but there was a particular quality to how he moved through space, as though he had calculated the exact number of steps required and was conserving everything beyond that. He said nothing. He looked at Victoria once, briefly the way you might register a weather system moving through, and then walked to the driver's side of the truck. "You should know," Victoria said, loud enough that the remark was clearly intended for the surrounding air as much as for the man, "that first impressions of a facility begin at the gate. Not in the boardroom, not in the brochure. At the gate, and what you've given this facility at the gate this morning is a tetanus risk." A few of the crew behind her manufactured quiet laughter. It was the kind of laughter that people produce when they understand their employment is now, in some diffuse way, connected to the approval of the woman speaking. The man opened the driver's door. He had not responded. He had not looked back at her. His hand rested on the doorframe. Then the sun, or what passed for sun through the Northamptonshire overcast, found a gap in the cloud cover and landed at exactly the right angle against the rear quarter panel of the truck. Victoria noticed it because she was still looking. Because part of her had expected a response and was waiting for it. And in waiting, she had kept her eyes on the vehicle rather than moving on. The light caught something beneath the surface grime on the rear door panel. Not paint, not a scratch. Something deliberate. Applied with precision. Now obscured by years of accumulated road dust and weather. 3 circles, interlocked. Wings extending from the outer ring. The rendering was small, perhaps 6 inches across, and worn to the color of tarnished silver, but the shape was unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in European motorsport. Titan Apex Racing. Victoria had been 13 years old when her father took her to the Monza circuit to watch the 1998 season finale. She remembered the car's low-slung, dark blue with silver detailing, and she remembered the noise, which was nothing like she had expected, nothing like the television had prepared her for. She remembered the logo on the pit wall banner. 3 interlocked circles and wings. She had the same logo framed in her private office in Mayfair, purchased at an estate auction 5 years ago. One of the most tactically sophisticated racing programs in European competition that had, inexplicably and without adequate explanation, ceased to exist at the end of the 2004 season. Her expression did not change. That was a discipline she had cultivated as carefully as any other, but her eyes moved from the logo to the man now sitting in the driver's seat. He had started the engine. The truck produced a sound that was she registered this despite herself entirely too healthy for the body it inhabited. He pulled forward, cleared the lane, and parked along the far wall of the bay perimeter. He got out and walked back toward the engineering bay entrance without looking at her. The convoy had stalled. The groundskeepers were watching Victoria. Adrian said, quietly, "Shall I get the introductions started inside?" Victoria didn't answer immediately. She was looking at the spot where the truck had been. Then, at the engineering bay door, now closed. "Yes," she said. "Give me a moment." The house on Harwick Close was a 2-bedroom semi-detached that Daniel Mercer rented for £740 a month, which was £110 more than it had cost 2 years ago, and £30 more than it had cost 6 months ago. He had calculated, twice, that if the rent increased at the current rate for another 2 years, he would need to make a decision about the second bedroom. He had not told Lily this. Lily was 7 and thought the house was permanent in the way that children understand permanence, which is to say completely, without contingency. The kitchen had a window above the sink that faced east. So when Daniel washed up after dinner, which he did every night because the rack of dishes drying by morning was a form of order he held onto, he could see whether the sky was likely to be kind the next day. Tuesday's sky had been non-committal. Wednesday's, the morning of his early shift, had been gray going darker, which turned out to be accurate. Lily's artwork occupied the section of refrigerator door that most households used for notes and takeaway menus. She drew cars, had drawn them since she was 4. With a dedication that had started as imitation, she copied what she saw him reading, the old technical magazines he kept in a box under the bed, and had, over 3 years, developed into something that was genuinely her own. Her cars were always fast. You could tell by the way she did the lines behind the wheels. She had worked this out herself, and Daniel had seen her do it. The moment she discovered that angle conveyed motion, and he had looked away because his throat had done something unexpected. She did not know the word aerodynamics. She understood intuitively what it meant. On the counter beside the microwave sat a wide-mouthed mason jar with a strip of masking tape across the front, on which Daniel had written, in capitals, "Fair." Not the concept, a specific one, the Hartwell Agricultural and Community Fair, first weekend of October, which Lily had attended the previous autumn and not stopped talking about since. The jar held £17.40. October was 8 months away. He collected her from Bramblewood Primary at 3:15. Every day he was on a morning or mid-shift. This was the logistical center around which everything else in his life was organized. He had turned down 3 higher-paying contracts in the past 2 years because the shifts were incompatible with school pickup. The garage foreman, a man named Pete Hollis, who had been in motorsport long enough to find most things unremarkable, had never asked Daniel why he insisted on the early rotations. Pete Hollis was a man who understood that people carried their reasons with them and did not always need to be asked to produce them. The truck's rear door panel had the logo because of Marcus Holt. Marcus had been Daniel's race engineer at Titan Apex older. Pedantic about telemetry, in a way that had, at the time, seemed obsessive, and had, in retrospect, been the reason Daniel had won anything at all. When the team collapsed, Marcus had driven 4 hours from his home in Coventry to see Daniel, who was not answering his phone and was, at that point, 2 weeks out from his wife Sarah's funeral, and 8 days into learning that a newborn requires feeding every 3 hours regardless of the state of the person doing the feeding. Marcus had brought food. He had sat in the kitchen for 2 hours without talking much. When he left, he had stuck the decal to the truck. He called it a month later and explained why. "I didn't want you to forget that you were good at something," Marcus had said. "I know that sounds like nothing right now, but I wanted it there." Daniel had not removed it. That was the entirety of his relationship with his racing past. A 6-inch decal on a truck that nobody had noticed in 3 years, that a woman in a 400-pound jacket had noticed in 30 seconds. That evening, after collecting Lily, he sat at the kitchen table while she finished the drawing she'd started at school. It was a blue car with a number 7 on the door panel. The lines behind the rear wheels curved just right. "Is that one of your cars?" she asked, without looking up. "Could be," he said. "Did you win in it?" "Some races." "How many?" He thought about it. Enough to know how it felt. She processed this. "I'm going to win lots of races," she said. "Then, after I learn to drive." "Good order of operations," he said. She looked up then and gave him the expression that was, he had concluded, the purest form of certainty he had ever encountered, the certainty of someone who has not yet accumulated enough experience to understand that certainty is a provisional condition. He didn't tell her about the woman at the gate. There was nothing useful in that story, not yet. He put the kettle on and thought about the logo on the rear panel and what it meant that someone had recognized it, and what that meant about who she was, and whether any of it mattered to the work he had to do tomorrow. He decided it didn't matter. He was usually right about this kind of thing. He had been wrong before. The last race Daniel Mercer started as a professional driver was at the Circuit de Catalonia, on a Tuesday in September 2004, a pre-season test session, not even a competitive event. He had qualified fastest in 5 of the 7 rounds that year. The championship points table had his name in second, with 2 rounds remaining, and a points gap that was, by any reasonable calculation, closable. His race engineer had told him that morning that the data from the previous weekend suggested they had found an additional 0.4 of a second in the final sector. 0.4. In motorsport, 0.4 is not a small number. 0.4 is the difference between a podium and a lap down also ran. He received the call at 9:17 in the morning. The team principal's secretary. Not the team principal himself, which told him something. He had walked out of the garage without explaining where he was going. His race suit was half on. He did up the zipper in the pit lane while speaking to the secretary, and then unzipped it again once he understood what she was actually telling him. He was back in England by that afternoon. He had not driven a racing car since. The team's collapse had followed 2 weeks later, or rather, became public 2 weeks later. The decision had been made before he left the circuit. An investment group called Meridian Capital Partners had been the primary financial backer of Titan Apex since 2001. Their withdrawal was not communicated to the drivers or engineering staff in advance. It was communicated via the banks, in the form of frozen accounts, which the team manager discovered when the fuel supplier's automated payment failed on a Wednesday morning. The FIA investigation that followed produced a report of considerable length and practical uselessness. The relevant finding, buried in Section 9 of the document, noted that a conflict of interest had existed within Meridian's management structure, specifically, that at least 2 principals of the fund had held undisclosed positions in a competing team's technical partner. The report used the phrase regulatory impropriety and recommended further review. The further review produced nothing that resulted in any action. Daniel had read the report once, when it was published. and had not read it again. He knew the name of one of those two principals, because Marcus Hollis had told him, 2 years after the collapse, when Marcus had been drinking more than usual, and felt that Daniel should know. The name was Adrian Cross. He had not known, until this week, that Adrian Cross now worked for Hale Motorsport. He discovered this on Wednesday afternoon, when the staff list went up on the notice board in the main corridor of the engineering complex, and he read it because he read everything posted near a workshop he was working in, a habit so old it had become reflexive. He read the name. He looked at it for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he went back to the brake caliper assembly he had been working on and finished it. He had not decided what to do with the information. He was holding it carefully, the way you hold a tool you have not yet identified the correct use for. The truck had been given to him by Sarah in the 2nd year of their relationship, bought at an auction in Coventry with money she had saved from her work as a physiotherapist. It was impractical, and she knew it, and had bought it anyway, because she had understood something about Daniel that he had not fully understood about himself. That he needed, occasionally, to carry things, large things, bulky things, things that required a vehicle built for purpose. She had signed the registration documents with a small, precise signature that was nothing like her personality, which was loud and generous, and frequently wrong about things in ways she found hilarious. She had been wrong, spectacularly, about whether she could eat a full portion of the gastropub's chili burger without consequences. She had been wrong about which lane to choose on the M6 on virtually every occasion. She had been confidently, cheerfully, infectiously wrong about many things. She had not been wrong about the truck. He kept it because it still ran, and because he could not think of a reason to replace it that outweighed the reason to keep it. This was not sentimentality. Or it was not only sentimentality, it was also that the truck ran well, and that practical reasons and personal reasons were not always in opposition. The decal on the rear panel had faded to the point where, in most light, it was barely visible. A woman with 400 pounds in her jacket had seen it in 30 seconds. He filed this away and did not examine it further. Victoria presented the operational restructuring plan on Thursday afternoon, in the conference room on the 2nd floor of the main building, to an audience of 43 staff members, who ranged from genuinely curious to quietly terrified. She had prepared the presentation herself. This was unusual. Her position made it possible to delegate most things, but for initial stakeholder communications, she preferred her own voice in every layer of the document, including the slide deck. She believed in the coherence of a single authorial perspective, particularly in the early stages of organizational change, when people were reading everything for subtext. The plan was, objectively, well constructed. It included realistic timelines, a sponsorship development framework, a technical upgrade path for the racing program, and a championship target, a podium finish in the Southern Cup within 18 months. That was ambitious without being fantastical. She had hired a performance analyst from a Formula 2 team in Bahrain to build the benchmarks. Adrian Cross presented the personnel framework, which was where the room temperature changed. Adrian was 44. Well-dressed in the specific way of men who have made money, without having grown up with it, the details slightly overdone. The watch marginally too prominent. He spoke with the fluency of someone accustomed to rooms that needed convincing. And he had prepared his section well. The competency matrix he described, a tiered assessment system for technical and operational staff, with quarterly reviews and performance thresholds, was presented as a mechanism for identifying excellence and retaining talent. In practice, and in the eyes of several people in the room who had been at the facility long enough to recognize what it meant, it was a systematic method for reclassifying existing roles at lower compensation levels, and for making it administratively straightforward to remove people who did not fit the new structure. This was not unusual in acquisition situations. Victoria knew it. The staff, most of them, knew it. The formal language of performance management and capability review was simply how these processes were conducted in institutional settings. At the back of the room, in the last row of chairs, Daniel Mercer sat with his arms resting on his thighs and his eyes on Adrian Cross. He had not been invited, strictly speaking. The all-staff meeting applied to contracted workers in the facility, which included his garage. He had not sought a seat at the front. He had taken the last available chair, which was the one nearest the door. He watched Adrian Cross explain the tiered assessment system. He had seen Adrian Cross at Monza, at Barcelona, at Hockenheim in team paddocks, in hospitality suites. In the background of photographs he no longer kept, he had seen Adrian Cross's signature on the bottom of a letter sent to the Titan Apex team principal that Marcus had shown him once, briefly, from his phone screen. The letter was dated 6 weeks before the accounts were frozen. Adrian Cross had not recognized Daniel. There was no reason he should. It had been 20 years, and Daniel had been significantly younger, and the contexts were so different as to make recognition unlikely, even if Adrian had any reason to look. Daniel did not look away from the front of the room. He listened to the full presentation. When it concluded, and the room began to empty, he stood, moved through the dispersing crowd, without speaking to anyone, and walked back down to the garage. Pete Hollis was waiting by the toolbox with a mug of tea that had long since gone cold. "How was it?" Pete said. "Professional," Daniel said. Pete considered this. "That bad?" Daniel picked up the wrench he had set down before the meeting and returned to the suspension component he had been working on. "Not yet," he said. The prototype was a modified GT specification machine, running a 3.8-liter turbocharged unit that had been retuned for the track's specific configuration. It had been on track for less than 40 minutes when it came back into the pit lane under its own power, but refusing to go beyond second gear, which indicated a problem somewhere in the power delivery chain that the onboard diagnostic system was describing, with characteristic unhelpfulness, as drivetrain fault. See workshop manual. The engineering team that gathered around it was qualified and experienced. They were also, as teams sometimes are under new ownership and time pressure, slightly fractured, aware that their roles were under review, aware that the performance of this prototype reflected on their capability, and therefore approaching the problem with a layer of self-consciousness that was not useful. The team leader, a man named Graham Ashby, who had been at the facility for 6 years, had identified 3 possible causes and was working through the elimination process. This was the correct approach. It was also going to take approximately an hour and a half. Daniel had been in the adjacent bay, working on a brake component, when the prototype came in. He had listened to the sound of the engine before it was switched off. He had noted the precise moment the driver had apparently disengaged the paddle in the last 50 meters of pit lane. He waited. He was not a member of the technical team. He was a contracted garage mechanic. The distinction was bureaucratically significant. After 20 minutes, when Graham Ashby was visible through the open bay door, standing with his arms folded and looking at a tablet readout with the expression of someone not finding what they expected, Daniel walked across the threshold. "May I?" he said. Not a request with much elaboration. Just the minimum necessary. Graham looked at him, then looked back at the car, then made the decision that experienced professionals sometimes make when they are running short on other options, which is to accept help from wherever it appears. "Go ahead," Graham said. Daniel crouched beside the car at the rear wheel arch. He looked, not at the diagnostic system, but at the physical actuator housing for the transmission. He looked for approximately 25 seconds. He stood up. "Your left rear actuator cable has a partial bind," he said. "It's allowing engagement below a threshold speed, but resisting under load. The sensor on the transmission control module is reading the bind as a gear position fault and defaulting to second to protect the unit." He paused. "Also, the wiring harness on the same side has a chafe point against the heat shield. It's not causing the problem yet, but it will." Graham looked at him for a moment longer than was strictly professional. "You're in Bay 7, Graham said. "Brake components." "Yes," Daniel said. He had already turned to go back to his bay. He was not interested in the aftermath of the observation. He had a brake component to finish. The actuator cable was found to be exactly as described. The chafe point was photographed and logged. The car was running correctly, within 40 minutes. Victoria Hale had been standing in the doorway to the pit lane corridor when the car came back into the bay. She had watched. She had not come forward. She had watched Daniel walk away from Graham Ashby's team and return to his own bay. and she had remained at the doorway for approximately 2 minutes after the engineering bay resumed its normal activity level. Then she had gone back upstairs. She pulled up the staff roster on her laptop and searched under contracted workers. She found his name, Daniel Mercer. Bay 7. Daily rate. Start date. 14 months ago. No qualifications listed under technical certification. No prior employment history. Just the name and the rate. She searched the name in the broader database. It returned nothing useful. She opened a different search, typed the name with a different set of search terms, and then stopped. It felt, she acknowledged to herself, like something she should not do using the facility's network. This was an instinct she had learned to trust. She closed the laptop. The overnight shift at Silverstone Ridge ended at 11. By 11:30, the pit lane was quiet in the way that large spaces become quiet, not silent, but without human traffic. The ambient sounds of the building becoming audible. Ventilation systems, the distant compression of the cooling system for the timing electronics, rain on the roof of the main hospitality suite. Victoria was still in the building because she worked late on restructuring weeks. This was not a decision. It was simply what happened. She had sent Claire home at 9:30 and had worked through the personnel assessment framework with a second coffee that had gone cold on the corner of the desk without her noticing until it was too late to be useful. She had gone downstairs to find the small kitchen adjacent to the media room, which she had been told had better coffee than the one on the second floor. The light in the pit lane corridor was on motion sensor. It came on as she walked through, and she saw him through the window. Daniel Mercer was sitting in the cab of his truck, which he had moved at some point to the interior parking area adjacent to Bay 7. The window was down. He had something in his hands, a piece of paper or card, held carefully. In the yellow light from the halide fixture above the bay, she could not make out what it was from the angle she was at. She kept walking toward the kitchen. She made coffee. She stood at the worktop and drank half of it, and then, for reasons she did not closely examine, walked back the way she had come. The light in the pit lane came on again as she moved through. She went to the interior parking area. He was still there, same position, though he had looked up when the light changed. She stopped a few feet from the truck. He didn't move. "You're still here," she said. "Bay light's better for the report paperwork," he said. "I borrow the electricity." It was a statement that contained, she noted, both an explanation and a preemptive acknowledgement that it might not be welcome. It was efficient in the way that his other statements had been efficient. She stood there. She had not decided to stay. She was simply not moving. "What's in your hand?" she said. He held it up. A child's drawing. A blue car, number 7. Crayon lines behind the wheels, suggesting speed. She could see from where she stood that it was good, not in an indulgent, "this is my child's drawing, therefore, it is good" way, but technically. The proportions were observed, not guessed. "My daughter," he said. "She draws cars. She draws everything, but mostly cars." Victoria leaned against the wall beside the bay door. The concrete was cold through her jacket. "My father drove," she said. "Not professionally. Club level. He took me to Monza in '98. She had not planned to say this. It came out with the same compressed naturalness of a fact that had been held for a long time under light pressure. Daniel looked at her for a moment. "Good year to go," he said. "It was." A pause. "He died when I was 22. Before I bought my first property." She was not sure why she had included that second sentence. There was something in the specificity of the loss, what it preceded, rather than what it followed, that she had never found a way to communicate adequately. The fact that he had not seen what she became, that there was no one from her earliest life who had seen what she became and could confirm that it meant something. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "What do you remember?" she asked. "About driving." "If you drove," the "if" was deliberate. She had not confirmed what she suspected. She was leaving him the option. "The moment before the breaking point," he said. "Everything sharpens. Like your brain understands exactly what it's for." A pause. "I don't miss many things." I miss that. She looked at the drawing in his hands. There's something you miss more, she said. He looked down at the paper. He didn't answer. This was, she understood, as much confirmation as she was going to receive. She pushed off the wall. The bay light turns off automatically at midnight, she said. Facilities management implemented it when the energy bill came in. I'll be done before then, he said. She walked back toward the building. She did not look back. The motion sensor light in the corridor activated as she moved through it, and then shut off behind her, and the interior parking area returned to the single yellow halide above Bay 7. The document arrived in Victoria's email at 8:14 on Friday morning, timestamped from Adrian's account at 7:56. Subject line: Contractor review urgent. Compliance gap. The body of the email was brief and admirably formatted. Adrian had attached a 3-page appendix. She read the email twice, then opened the appendix. The core claim was administrative. Daniel Mercer's contracted role in the technical support category required, under the revised facility insurance and liability framework that Hale Motorsport had introduced upon acquisition, a minimum Level 3 motor vehicle technical qualification or equivalent. Daniel's personnel file contained no record of any formal qualification. He had been employed on the basis of a previous manager's discretionary assessment, a process that no longer existed under the new framework. All of this was accurate. The appendix also included a risk assessment that mentioned, in one paragraph, that the actuator diagnosis from Thursday had been conducted by an unqualified contractor in proximity to a prototype racing vehicle, and that this represented a potential liability exposure. This was technically accurate and contextually misleading in a way that was carefully engineered to be difficult to challenge without appearing defensive. Victoria signed the termination of contract form at 9:05, on her way between 2 back-to-back calls that she could not move. She did it with the particular briskness of someone who has placed a decision in a frame that makes it seem administrative rather than personal. This was a skill she had refined over 7 years. It had served her well. It felt wrong the moment after she signed. She was between calls. She did not have time to examine why it felt wrong. She put the tablet down and took the next call. Daniel was given his notice via a printed form left in Bay 7, which was how contracted personnel decisions were communicated under the new administrative framework. Pete Hollis found him before the form did, because Pete had been told by someone in HR, and Pete was the kind of man who thought that people deserved to hear things from a person rather than from paper. "I'm sorry, Dan," Pete said. "Not your decision," Daniel said. Still, Daniel looked at the form. He read it in full, which most people in his situation did not do. He folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket. "The GT3 on Bay 9 needs the front anti-roll bar re-shimmed before next Thursday," he said. "I left notes on the spec sheet. Whoever takes it over should read them first." Pete nodded. Daniel collected the items from his bay, 3 hand tools he owned personally, a notebook, a small framed photo he kept on the shelf above the workbench, and put them in a canvas bag. The whole process took less than 8 minutes. He was at Bramblewood Primary by 3:15. "Good day?" Lily asked, climbing into the back seat. "Reasonable," he said. "We did the water cycle," she said. "It evaporates and then becomes rain. Everything is recycled." "That's accurate," he said. "Is that a good thing?" "Generally," he said. He did not look at the laptop until Lily was asleep. She slept in the way of exhausted children completely, her arm over the edge of the bed, one sock on and one somewhere under the duvet. He tucked the arm back, stood in the doorway for a moment, and then went to the kitchen. The laptop was a 6-year-old ThinkPad that ran well, because he maintained it the way he maintained everything that was worth maintaining. He connected to his personal VPN, opened the browser, and navigated to the secure folder on the cloud service he used for work documentation. He had photographed the car's service logs and his own shift records on every day of the past 14 months. This was a habit he had developed not from paranoia but from experience from having watched, a long time ago, a team's documentation disappear when financial interests required it. He pulled up Thursday's records. His shift had ended at 3:45 in the afternoon. The timestamp on his final log entry was 3:42 p.m. The access log for Bay 7 showed his keycard exit at 3:48. He then navigated to the folder containing the prototype's pre-race data package, which was hosted on the facility's shared technical server, and which he had access to in his contracted role for cross-reference purposes. He had downloaded a copy at 11:15 the previous Tuesday, before the prototype was even on track, as part of his standard documentation process for any vehicle sharing base space or equipment during his shift. He compared the baseline data with the data recorded after the qualifying incident. Specifically, the shift timing parameters in the transmission control module's profile. In his Tuesday download, shift bias neutral, with a +2% buffer on high, load upshift, standard. In the post-incident analysis log, shift bias reduced to -8% on high load upshift, combined with an actuator response threshold altered by 11 milliseconds. These were not settings that a vehicle would arrive at through normal operation or racing wear. He looked at the change log. The modification entry showed no author. This was unusual, because the system required authentication for parameter changes. The authentication field showed a service account token rather than an individual user ID. Service account access was used for automated system maintenance and was not supposed to be available for manual configuration changes. He looked at the timestamp on the modification. Tuesday, 2:17 a.m. His shift had ended the previous afternoon. He had not been in the building. His keycard access log, which he had also downloaded as part of his documentation habit, confirmed this precisely. He sat at the kitchen table for a while after that. The only sound was the refrigerator and the rain against the window, which had started sometime after 10 and settled into the steady, committed English rain that has no interest in stopping. He looked at the mason jar on the counter. £17.40. He thought about Marcus Hollis and the decal on the truck and what Marcus had meant when he said, "Don't forget who you are." He thought about what it had felt like on Thursday to crouch beside the prototype and know immediately what was wrong, not because he had worked through a process, but because 20 years of that specific knowledge lived in his hands and his perception in a way that no alternative process had displaced. He thought about the way the woman at the doorway had watched him walk away from it. He opened a new folder on the laptop. He organized everything he had, the timestamps, the telemetry comparisons, the access logs, the service account token documentation into a single compressed file, clearly named and dated. He saved it to the USB drive he kept in the kitchen drawer, next to the takeaway menus and the spare battery for Lily's nightlight. Then he made tea, because it was late and cold, and tea was practical, and he sat at the table until it was gone. He called Claire Sutton's work number at 8 in the morning and asked, with the minimum necessary preamble, if it was possible to arrange 15 minutes with Miss Hale. He expected to be redirected to HR. He expected the information to be absorbed by administrative process. Claire Sutton asked him to hold for 40 seconds and came back with, "She can see you at 10. Bay 7, or the second-floor conference room." He said the conference room was fine. Victoria was already there when he arrived, standing rather than sitting, which suggested she was aware this was not a routine meeting. She had a coffee. She did not offer him one. This was not rudeness. It was a reflex of the businesslike. He put the USB on the table. "Before you say anything," she said, "I want to look at this first," he said. A pause. She picked it up. He walked her through it on the conference room screen, the same screen on which the restructuring plan had been presented 2 days ago. He did not editorialize. He showed her the baseline data, the modification entry, the service account token, the timestamp. He showed her his keycard access log, which established his physical absence from the building at 2:17 on Tuesday morning. He then opened the folder containing the facility's security camera archive, which he had access to via the technical support credentials that had not yet been revoked, and played a 15-second clip from the camera covering the access corridor to the transmission data terminal. A man in dark clothing, 2:20 a.m. Tuesday, using a service account tablet. Adrian Cross was recognizable in the clip. Not definitively. Not beyond all doubt, the image quality and angle made absolute certainty a matter for a professional analyst. but recognizable. Victoria did not speak during the presentation. When it finished, she sat down. She looked at the screen. "He changed the parameters," she said. "Not a question." Processing. After my shift ended, the report that cited my diagnosis as a liability exposure was produced the same morning. Adrian submitted the contractor compliance review. She looked at the table, then at the screen again, then at him. "I signed the termination form without reading the full file," she said. "I know. That was a mistake." "Yes." She met his eyes. There was something in her expression that was not comfortable to look at, not because it was angry or hostile, but because it was something that a person of her particular construction did not often permit to be visible, something that resembled accountability without the protection of professional language around it. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mercer," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, once. "Adrian Cross was involved in Meridian Capital Partners," he said. "The investment group that withdrew funding from Titan Apex Racing in 2004. He kept his voice level. "This was information, not accusation. The distinction mattered. There's an FIA report." Section 9. "I don't know if the pattern here is coincidence or something deliberate that's not mine to determine. But you should know." She was very still. "I know the name," she said. Quietly, he looked at her. "My father's legal team reviewed Meridian in 2003, she said, "in connection with a different acquisition. The fund was flagged for governance concerns." He passed before the review concluded. "A pause. I should have run a deeper background check on Cross before hiring. People miss things," he said. The fact that he said this after what had just been documented, after the termination form, after everything was something she registered and put aside to examine later, when she had more room for it. Adrian Cross was placed on administrative suspension, pending formal investigation before noon. The documentation was forwarded to the FIA compliance office by early afternoon. By mid-afternoon, 2 board members had been briefed. Daniel's contract was reinstated by 3 o'clock, with a formal letter citing the resolution of the qualification review, a face-saving mechanism that both of them understood for what it was, and neither chose to remark upon. The Southern Cup qualifying round took place on the 3rd weekend in May, which arrived with the kind of English weather that suggests meteorological regret, brilliant mid-morning sunshine following 3 days of gray drizzle. As though the sky were apologizing, Daniel Mercer was not in the car. He was in the pit wall timing station, headset on, a screen showing telemetry feeds from the 2 Silverstone Ridge entries. His title on the crew register, "For the first time, read Technical Consultant Interim, pending formal ratification." Victoria had used the word interim because she was a precise person and the formal process had not concluded. Daniel had said that was fine. Graham Ashby's team had come around. In the 10 days between the investigation and the race, in the way that skilled professionals come around when they understand that a decision was made correctly and for the right reasons, Graham himself had initiated a working session with Daniel that lasted 4 hours and covered, among other things, a full review of the shift timing parameters for both race cars. There was a kind of professional respect between them that did not require social warmth to be real. It was visible in how they stood relative to each other when looking at the same data. The first car ran cleanly through qualifying, 5th on the grid. The second car had a better pace. Its driver, a 23-year-old from Yorkshire named Tom Warwick, had been quick all session, running 3rd with 8 minutes of qualifying remaining. Then the telemetry shifted. Daniel saw it before the engineer on Tom's side flagged it a 2-millisecond extension in the shift time on the upshift at the top of the back straight, repeated across 3 consecutive laps. Not a mechanical fault. A timing bias introduced by the driver to protect the transmission under a specific set of conditions that he was managing intuitively. Daniel keyed the radio. "Tom, you're riding the shift on the back straight. Let the system take it at 93% throttle. Then commit full. You're getting half the exit speed." Silence for 2 seconds. Then the throttle trace on the telemetry changed. The next lap was 0.3 faster than the previous best. Tom qualified 2nd. The race itself was 72 laps of patient, disciplined work. The kind that does not produce dramatic moments, but does produce results. Daniel managed the strategy from the pit wall tire degradation, fuel load, gap management, making calls that were short, specific, and correct often enough that Graham Ashby, standing 2 feet away, stopped double-checking them against his own calculation after about 30 laps. With 12 laps remaining, the car in first place developed a brake bias issue and fell off pace. Tom Warwick held second. He finished there. Second place at Southern Cup qualifying was the highest championship result the facility had recorded in 6 years. In the debrief held in the conference room, not the pit lane, because Victoria had decided this was an occasion for chairs, there was the particular quiet of a group of people who are aware that something has changed, but have not yet agreed on how to describe it. Victoria did not make a speech. She thanked the team once, specifically, and let the numbers carry the rest. Afterward, when the debrief had emptied and the catering table was being cleared, she found him in the corridor outside. "Technical director," she said. "It's a formal role. Full salary, benefits, reporting directly to me. I'll have the offer in writing by Monday. The school runs," he said. She looked at him. "I need the schedule to be compatible with school pickup. 3:15. Every day that I'm on site." "Done," she said. He nodded. She said, "The investigation into Adrian Cross has been forwarded to the FIA and to the relevant financial regulators. I've been advised it may take some time. It took 20 years to get this far," he said. "I'm not in a hurry." She looked at him in the way she had looked at the truck on the first morning, not with the coldness of that moment, but with the same concentrated attention, as though reading something slowly, making sure she understood it before turning the page. "Monday," she said. "Monday," he agreed. He collected Lily at 3:15 on the Monday, which was also the Monday he signed the offer letter, which he had read twice with his usual thoroughness and found to be fair in its terms. She climbed into the back seat and put her bag on the floor and said, before anything else, "We're doing fractions. They're not that hard, but Chloe thinks they're impossible." So I explained it to her. "What did you tell her?" "I said it's just cutting things up. Like pizza." "That's correct." "I know," she said, with the serene confidence of the recently vindicated. He drove home via the long route, which added 4 minutes but past the edge of the industrial park, where the trees were currently doing something admirable with their spring leaves. He had always taken this route in May. It was not a decision he made. It was simply the route he took. That evening, after dinner and fractions homework, and the bath time negotiation that had been ongoing for approximately 3 years without resolution, he went out to the truck. He had a cloth, a mild solvent, and 15 minutes before the light went entirely, he cleaned the rear quarter panel properly for the first time since Marcus had put the decal there 11 years ago. The 3 interlocked circles emerged from beneath the grime with the patience of things that have been waiting for a specific condition to be met. The wings, in the May evening light, caught the color of the sky, not silver now, not the tarnished gray they had been, but something between gold and copper, the particular color of light at the end of a day that has been, on balance, better than it needed to be. He stood back, looked at it for a moment. The phone in his pocket buzzed. He took it out and looked at the screen. An email notification. Victoria Hale's name in the sender line. Subject: Team Brief. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Your presence required. He put the phone away. In the house, Lily was at the kitchen table with the yellow crayon, adding speed lines to the wheels of a car that had, he could see through the window, a number 7 on the door. He folded the cloth, held it for a second. He went inside.